So, the potential upcoming Jon Snow series, could it actually work? So let's talk about it. Let's jump into some potential plot ideas and, of course, casting. And the biggest question of them all, will we see the return, if it happens, of Daenerys Targaryen? Now, ever since House of the Dragon aired, and as good as it is and as good as it would continue to be, it's just not Game of Thrones. We mentioned this in several live streams. As great as it feels to be back in Westeros, it has certainly the feeling of Game of Thrones. It has that edge. It has that darkness. It has all the great aspects that we saw in Game of Thrones as far as the look and feel of the show. I don't think it quite lived up to the expectations that we would be back in, Game of Thrones world. I mean, sure, we were back in Westeros, and again, I'm not ragging on the show. I really, really loved it for the most part, but it just didn't scratch that Game of Thrones itch, so to speak, and I think a lot of people feel that way. So the more I've been thinking about this Jon Snow series that we got announced, I think back in July, we talked about it in plenty of the live streams I know before House of the Dragon started. I was saying initially, I just don't think it's needed. I don't think it's necessary. I don't know how it could work because, all the characters would have to come back to some degree. What happens to Dany? What happened with Drogon flying off to the east? Did she get resurrected? All these type of questions, because I don't think ultimately it can just stand on its own as far as Kit Harington playing Jon Snow north of the wall and essentially becoming some kind of Jon Snow sitcom with Tormund providing comic relief. And of course, I do think even with House of the Dragon being out and we're now heading into season 2, it's going to be in another year and a half or 2 years or so, I think people are still craving Game of Thrones in the sense of the original series and getting some kind of resolution, because I think people are still pretty much furious about the ending of GOT, and they really crave that resolution. I know I do personally. I think a lot of people feel that way, at least on my channel, in my community or whatever, and live streams. We've talked about it several times. I think we want to see, kind of the good old days, kind of going back to the time when all seemed to be right in the world as far as all this type of stuff. And I know it's just a TV show and all that, but it brought a lot of people together. It had a huge community that got together around this, regardless of background and all that kind of stuff. And that's one aspect I thought was really outstanding about it. But people want to see the original cast to some degree because we've seen them scattered now. And of course, a lot of us will always see people like Kit Harington as Jon Snow, Emilia Clarke as Daenerys Targaryen, Alfie Allen as Theon, whatever, regardless of whatever happens in their actual careers. But I do think that people want to see the original cast back together and at least try to course correct to some degree on the finale of Game of Thrones, the final season. I think most people still agree that it was just horrendous, even the last 2 or 3 seasons, but really season 8 is what really put the final nail in the coffin and really broke a lot of hearts. And I think HBO knows this. There's been a lot of backlash over the years, petitions, all that kind of stuff. So I think they really want to move forward with this, and I think it would be a good idea now that I think about it more. Originally, George R. R. Martin said, of course, there would be no sequels. This would, be the ending of the books of A Dream of Spring if we ever get the books, which I doubt we will. But the point being that I think this is really, really needed. If they do this right, I think it could actually work. So let's talk about some potential plot ideas and, of course, some casting. So I think from a writing standpoint, I want to look at this a little bit from a writing standpoint, which is what makes stories great, is the writing. It doesn't matter who you have in the cast. It doesn't matter, what kind of budget you have for CGI. If the story's not there, if the writing's not right, as we just saw kind of with the Rings of Power, I just did a video on that a couple weeks ago, it just doesn't matter what it looks like or feels like. It has to have a good story. So from a writing standpoint, you have to have Jon come back forever changed from the fallout of Game of Thrones. He just, again, he's up north of the wall. He's with Tormund, obviously, and some wildlings, but you just can't have it become kind of a Jon Snow sitcom running around in the north just trying to live a normal life. I don't think that would work. I think that would maybe last a season and then be almost instantly canceled because it's just not going to have that appeal. And I don't think, and no offense to Kit Harington as an actor, but I don't think Jon Snow can carry that series himself. It can center around Jon Snow just like Game of Thrones did, essentially, with him and Daenerys being parallel characters. But I don't think he could carry it on his own as a character. So we have to get some answers. We have to get some answers and tied into Game of Thrones. So maybe there is some portion of that show where he is up north and, he's thinking about the past and what went down, all this kind of thing. He's got to be changed from all this. He's got to be changed for the worst, and to some degree, as far as, his mind, his mental state, his mindset, all that kind of things, the things he's remembering, PTSD, all that type of stuff. So maybe he wants some answers. So maybe up in the north he could go exploring and find some answers to the origins of the White Walkers. I don't think you can bring the White Walkers back. They can never come back. There is a way to bring them back for sure. You could go have the Order of the Green Men, the Owl of Faces. I talked about that in my whole entire series on how I thought this should have ended, or at least how I think it will still be important in the books. You can go check that out. I'll leave a link to that playlist in the description below. It's a long video series called A Dragon Raised by Wolves, one of what I consider to be some of my best videos with the help of James, if you guys know as well. We really dug deep to predict the ending way back before Season 7 started, and some of these important places. So I think there is a way to bring back the White Walkers. You can go to the Owl of Faces. There's always Dragon Glass. There's always other people to shove Dragon Glass shards into their chest and create new White Walkers, I suppose. So I think that's possible, but I don't think that's a good idea. That's been done. That's been used. That's one of those things I think, like they said in the ridiculous Star Wars sequels, let the past die, all that kind of stuff. You just can't bring back the White Walkers. The Night King was the original White Walker. He was killed. The rest of them exploded. There are no more White Walkers in white, so I don't think that's a good idea, although it is theoretically possible with the Owl of Faces and the Order of the Green Men. All the things that we did not get to explore in Game of Thrones. Going back to Jon, though, as far as a character, he has to have this moral dilemma from a writing perspective. He wants to live free, away from kings and queens, and all this kind of stuff as far as the political system being a monarchy and feudalism and all that type of thing. And up in the north, they're truly free. But truly free is kind of boring as far as the TV show goes, as far as writing goes. So he has to have some moral dilemma where, he's in the north, he's living free with Tormund. Maybe he's meeting some chicks up there, some wildling chicks or whatever, trying to kind of move on from Dany and Ygritte and all that type of stuff. But I think, duty's got to call. He's got to kind of finish what he started in some way, make sure it never happens again, accept who he is as Aegon Targaryen as opposed to Jon Snow, the son of Ned Stark. Not that Ned will never not be his father. He raised him. The point being that he really didn't get to, become who he's supposed to be. He didn't get to really finish what he started. And he kind of did in the sense of, killing Dany and kind of ending all the threats on both ends, as far as the Night King on one side and Dany on the other, which does, fit what we talked about years ago. We were talking about the balance and everything and symmetry of the show. But I think that he has to have this moral dilemma where he wants to, make sure that the realm that he loves, the North and his family, are all safe, and something like this never happens again, where he doesn't want the realm to fall into chaos. So he has to have some kind of moral dilemma where, he's living in free, but he feels guilty about it, and he needs to go back to Westeros to set some things right and make sure things like that never happen again. But in order to do that, he needs to accept who he is as Aegon Targaryen, the prince that was promised, whatever. So maybe he can do that in a different way than we kind of saw in Game of Thrones Season 8. I think one good idea for a general plot line is he wants to make sure all people are living in some type of freedom. I think this is really, really important and something we don't see too much in fantasy. I started to explore this a little bit in my book, The Crimson Gods, and I'll definitely want to expand on this for sure in Book 2 of my series, The Crimson Gods. But I think it would definitely fit in Jon's character that he wants to come back to Westeros to make sure all people are living free, just like he is up in the north without, the monarchy, without feudalism. Because eventually we know what will happen, as I mentioned when Game of Thrones ended. When Bran eventually dies, somebody will eventually dissolve that council and essentially usurp the throne and start the whole process all over again, and it'll never end. So I think that Jon, being Aegon Targaryen, while he still has a name for himself in that regard, once that's proven to people through Bran or whatever it may be, that he could potentially change things permanently as far as, how things are managed in Westeros. Because right now it still is essentially a monarchy with feudalism and all that good stuff as well. They just have this kind of council or whatever. But we know eventually somebody would dissolve that council. And I think Jon would want all people to live free, and that would be his goal as, Aegon Targaryen, the current heir to the Iron Throne. So maybe instead of having a big bad like the White Walkers, you don't have to have this physical antagonist that threatens directly threatens the lives of everyone, but feudalism itself threatens the lives of everyone. I think he could come back to Westeros to propose change. And he certainly at least has to visit his family to some degree. And on top of it, of course, he should continue to feel really guilty about, what he did to Dany as far as killing her. And maybe he wants to go back. He just has to know, was she saved? Drogon flew off to the east. He knows he's been resurrected, so he knows it's possible. So he has this overwhelming guilt, so he's trying to, live a normal life. He's trying to find love, etc. in the north, but it doesn't quite feel right to him. And of course, he thinks of Dany all the time. So maybe he's up there trying to live a normal life, and he's smashing various wildling chicks, like you guys are smashing that like and subscribe button right now. But he only thinks of her and riding the dragon, and he needs to know if she is alive or whatever it may be. So maybe that's kind of a motivation for him to return to Westeros and find out, what happened to Dany. Did she actually come back? Is there a possibility? What about Drogon? He is Aegon Targaryen. As part of him accepting who he is as a Targaryen, which he kind of did in Game of Thrones. Obviously, he started riding a dragon, all that kind of stuff as well, being Rhaegal. Maybe he wants to reconnect with Drogon. Maybe he doesn't want to see the last dragon die out. Maybe he wants to continue that in the sense of his family, but also wants feudalism and all that to end, to essentially break the wheel and continue Dany's vision. So I think it is possible to do this show without Dany. I think it would be a travesty if they didn't bring Dany back to some degree. So I think it is possible for it to work without Dany, but it has to depend on Jon having this motivation to kind of continue what she started as far as breaking the wheel and starting to change things in Westeros. So essentially what I'm saying, instead of having the White Walkers return as the big bad, because a lot of us didn't like how it ended in one episode, how Cersei was kind of the big bad at the end, ended up really being Dany. The White Walkers were killed in one episode, and like King, etc. I still don't think you can bring White Walkers back to make him a big bad villain. You don't need a villain in the sense of a physical threat. I think it can work with the right writing of having the antagonist be feudalism itself, and Jon wanting all people to be free as the wildlings. So I think that would be a good motivation. So there's just a few ideas for a potential plot for the Jon Snow sequel. So let's talk about casting really quickly. Obviously, we want to see some of the cast come back. I do think, obviously, Tormund will be back. But again, this cannot be just Jon and Tormund running around and introducing new wildling characters or whatever. We have to see some of the original cast to some degree in order for it to feel right and really bring back that excitement to really feel like a Game of Thrones sequel if this is going to actually happen. So obviously you're going to have Tormund there, and I certainly think, again, he would come back in a heartbeat. But Jon has to see his family. He has to come back to Westeros. He can't just explore the north or whatever, and we never see any old Game of Thrones sets. Now, again, it would be great if he got some answers on the White Walkers and kind of provided those for us, and maybe he wants to come back to Westeros for that reason and, kind of share his findings with his brother Bran, Bran the Broken being the king now, and his family and friends in the realm in general, to keep it from ever happening again or whatever. So that'll be fine having him up north to some degree, but he has to come back home. You're going to have to see him go by Winterfell, for example. So will we see Sansa return? Would she make an appearance at least every once in a while? Or would it be something where he goes to Winterfell, he sees some old friends, whatever, we see the location, maybe Sansa makes an appearance as Queen in the North, and of course she has an independent kingdom now or whatever. But maybe she doesn't have to be a full-time cast member, so I don't know if Sophie Turner would be interested in coming back full-time. And if she does, what role would she play being her own queen in her own kingdom? She would be part of that system that Jon's trying to destroy if, that plot line would go through what I was talking about before as far as, trying to change the system itself. And of course, you have to ask about Arya. Is she still traveling? Is she still seeing what's west of Westeros? Which, again, I always thought was dumb. It's just Essos. I mean, she'll maybe figure that out and come home rather quickly. Would that be a separate show with Arya, or would it be maybe a better side plot in the same story, and a parallel story at that, where Arya is kind of reassessing her life? Does she really want to just, stay single and traveling her whole life or whatever and exploring? Or does she want to come back home and settle down and try to change things as well? That could be a little parallel plot line where Jon and Arya are so much alike. That would be really cool, I think. So will we see Arya again? Maybe she's reassessing her life just like Jon is up north, and she's thinking about Gendry. Maybe she realizes there's nothing wrong with settling down and being a lady in the sense of, finding love or whatever, as opposed to being, kind of this lone wolf when she was preaching, the pack survives together, that type of thing. So you have to think about Arya. What about Bran the Broken, his brother, obviously, Tyrion, Bronn, Brienne, etc. I think Brienne would certainly come back. I don't know if Peter Dinklage would ever come back or not. I feel like he's beyond this now, and he's got so much other stuff going on that he could do. But you would have to at least mention Tyrion, or maybe see him on occasion. Again, maybe he can just be an occasional character or something like that. But you have, you're going to have, King Bran has to be pretty much involved, because if he agrees, or John's trying to approach him saying, look, we got to change how this all works as far as breaking the wheel, you know, Dany's true vision, who she truly was, and kind of honoring her in that sense, even if she doesn't come back to the show. I think you got to have Bran involved, so you got to think about that. Characters that you're familiar with, obviously a lot of people died, so you're not going to see everyone. But of course, the big one would be Daenerys Targaryen. We got to see Dany in some way, shape, or form, or the story has to at least revolve around Dany's original vision as far as her writing aspect goes. So Emilia Clarke has said that she, back in, I think, June or July when this all broke or whatever, you know, in several interviews, she did say she was kind of done with the burden of playing Daenerys Targaryen. But even more recently, she also has been asked about it again, and she did say never. So I think there's a possibility, and with them being such close friends, that she could possibly come back, at least to some limited degree or whatever. But I don't see it working really good without her, although, again, I think it can be done. But I think you got to get Dany back. You got to fix this shit, and would really, even though you can't correct everything that Game of Thrones Season 8 did as far as the story goes and how the writing was just absolutely horrible in most areas, I do think you can rectify a few things if you bring her back, have her resurrected, whatever, and have her live and tell the tale of what she went through and why she went through the change she did. You have her resurrected, and then you have these two parallel characters. They've been parallel characters the entire series of Game of Thrones, and now death has changed her in some way, like we were supposed to see that happen with Jon. Death made her, for example, you know, see the issue in what she had become. How she got, you know, power hungry, and, you know, she let all the rage and revenge and all that kind of build up, and she destroyed a whole city and you know, 1 million innocent people essentially. And now she wants to come back, reunite with Jon. Maybe she wants to rule with Jon and accept that they are a power couple, and she wants to rule with him to some degree and finish what she started in the aspect of breaking the wheel, which would align with Jon's motivations as well, to make sure all people are free of all this kind of stuff, and have, again, feudalism and all this kind of infighting amongst land and families and all that stuff kind of go away, because that would be the antagonist of this series if done with some of our suggestions. And like I said, in my book, The Crimson Gods, I do start to explore a little bit of transition to some form of democracy. Now, I'm not saying instant democracy overnight. I'm not saying pure democracy. I'm not necessarily saying a constitutional republic type of thing like here in America. But they have to start changing to some form of democracy. We saw that a little bit in Game of Thrones with the council, but again, that can be easily broken up by the next asshole king that's elected to the thing, where he just kills them all and he takes over and essentially usurps the whole thing. So that's where they need to come in and change all these things. And in my book, for example, and again in book 2, I'll definitely want to explore that deeper. What does that look like? What does that look like from a transition from feudalism and a monarchy to some form of democracy where all people have a voice? And I think that'll be part of Jon and Dany's vision. So let's explore that transition to some form of democracy in this new show, Snow. They scrapped Dany being pregnant in the previous show as well. Obviously, there was some leaked scenes and screenshots where she was actually pregnant. We know that was going to happen. They were going to have a child, or at least she was going to be pregnant for a while. Maybe she lost that child. We don't know. Just like they scrapped the Cersei miscarriage as well. They certainly did that. That's been confirmed. So maybe you make that happen again. They get back together and they're working on all this together. They get pregnant again. Maybe their children or kids or whatever, they could be the last kings or queens before some kind of democracy takes hold and people are actually elected to lead or whatever it may be. So you could bring that back as well. But anyway, I do think that Dany would be the best option of having her back, because you want these two in the same show again. That would really bring back everybody. That would really light up the internet. Obviously, it would be bigger than House of the Dragon, and maybe break the numbers of God and House of the Dragon itself as far as the number of people watching. But the more I think about this Jon Snow series, the more I kind of want it to happen. If they go some kind of route where it's not just him living up north, beyond the wall, whatever, and all that good stuff as well. They could explore so many things. Why is the Night's Watch still around? Some of these common sense things you would think they would have mentioned in Game of Thrones. There's no need for a Night's Watch anymore. Why was he banished anyway when Grey Worm was leaving? He did the right thing, what he thought was right or whatever, but again, it's still a crime. I do understand that, but why is he banished to the wall? That was really just to satisfy Grey Worm, and why are we worried about Grey Worm anyway? He's gone now, who cares? Bran was the king, so why do you have to banish your own brother? At least have that being Jon's decision to go north of the wall and live in a free area without the worry of kings and queens and all that stuff. So again, the more I think about it, and of course it's a lot of nostalgia as well, I think a lot of people just want this stuff back, the good old days of Game of Thrones, the more I want it to happen. And as good as House of the Dragon Season 1 was, it was never quite the same every Sunday when I sat down to watch it before the live streams. Although I immensely enjoyed the show, and especially the live streams, post-show live streams afterwards, like we always used to do back in the day, wasn't quite the same, and it didn't really scratch that Game of Thrones itch that I think everybody had like I expected it to. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you like to see Snow potential series? Again, this is not going to necessarily 100% happen, although I think they're missing out on a lot of money if they don't make it happen. Do you think that will help kind of rectify some of the issues with the ending of Game of Thrones? Really quickly, thank you so much to my Patreons who continue to support this channel as we try to figure things out going forward. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.